Greetings. Welcome to the video series Miss Anne Thrope Explains. I'm Anne Thrope, and in this video, I will explain what the phrase spheres of writing means and why an understanding of the different spheres of writing will help you with your writing in college and with any writing you will do in your career. I want to remind you that anytime I ask you to think about something, what I really want you to do is to jot down some ideas or questions that come to mind about the topic I've asked you to think about. Thinking in this class is always done on paper or on a page in a word processing program. You will need these notes when you return to class. You will find a graphic organizer on page 4 in your binder, just for spheres of writing. Approximately 2,500 years ago, a very wise man developed a philosophy of life that undergirded Chinese culture and politics until the beginning of the last century. Confucius was profoundly concerned with harmony, both social and political. One tenet of his philosophy was what we will call rectification of terms. He believed that the first duty of a leader was to rectify terms, to make sure words, their use, and their definitions were in accord with how people lived. For us, that means that we agree on the definitions of terms important to our endeavors. If you ask a group of English teachers or writing instructors what the word writing means, you might be surprised by the variety of ways that group will define it. If you gather all the English teachers in your school in a room and ask each of them to write out a definition of what good writing is, you will be hard-pressed to find 2 of them who agree completely. Yet the way a writing instructor defines the word writing dictates how she will assess all writing submitted to her. If English teachers and writing instructors can't agree on what constitutes good writing, how will their students master the skills necessary to succeed in college-level writing classes? How will their students master the skills necessary to succeed in their chosen careers? That's why, in this video, I will explain how you can rectify the term writing, regardless of the assignment or the professor. To begin, we will operate on the promise that the world of writing is huge. If you doubt me, put the word writing in a search engine. Put it in the Amazon.com search engine. Better yet, open up the library tab on your school account and do an academic search for the term. A term this huge, this abstract, can lead to all kinds of confusion. The first step in rectifying the term, therefore, is to recognize that in our culture, most writing falls into one of 3 categories, or spheres. Those 3 spheres are personal, creative, and academic. Almost any piece of writing or any writing assignment will fall clearly into one of the 3 spheres of writing. Once you understand the distinguishing characteristics of each sphere, you will know how to proceed. Even with writing that seems to span 2 spheres, or maybe all 3, we can tease out the characteristics that are most pertinent to our study of writing in this course. To sort writing, both writing assignments and finished written products, into the appropriate sphere, we need to pay attention to who the assumed audience is. the language register the audience expects and the writing requires, and the purpose the writing serves in our culture. But I need to issue a caveat. Be very careful about the word purpose. Here, we do not mean why the writer wrote the piece. Rather, we mean what purpose does this sphere of writing serve in our culture? Let's start with personal. And to help ourselves think clearly about audience, which language register predominates, and purpose, let's make a list of examples of personal writing. Diaries and journals, personal letters, emails and text messages to friends and family, love notes, to-do lists, shopping lists. Although short, this list is sufficient for us to determine audience purpose and predominant register. So let's ask ourselves, who is the audience for a diary or a journal entry? Most of the time, it's the writer herself who is the intended audience. Yes, there are rare occasions when one allows someone else to read a diary or a journal entry, but those, I must remind you, are rare. And while we can cite personal diaries and journals that have been published, our distinctions in this video are about the general use of diaries and journals in our culture, not those rare exceptions that have become part of our literary heritage. That's a topic for a different video. So who is the audience for a personal letter, a personal email, or a personal text message? Isn't it someone we know well? Someone with whom we have an emotional bond? What about love notes? These are intended for our beloved, are they not? Take a second to think about what inferences we might draw about the audience for personal writing. Jot down your ideas in your notebook. You might want to pause the video. Now that you have your ideas down on paper, let's review. Isn't the audience someone the writer knows well? Someone with whom the writer has a certain emotional intimacy? Think about someone to whom you would write a personal letter. Think about how you relate to this person. Think about why you would bother to write a personal letter in the first place. How would you characterize that relation between the writer and the audience in this sphere of writing, this sphere of personal writing? I would suggest that there is real intimacy between the writer and the audience, that the audience knows a great deal about the inner life and inner workings of the psyche. If you have kept a diary or a journal, or if you send emails and texts to family and friends, think about the language you use to compose your email or to write in your journal. What's the predominant register? For most of us, the predominant register is casual. Do you remember what I explained about the diction and syntax of casual register in the language registers video? Casual register is marked by short sentences and colloquial language. The nouns and verbs of casual register tend to be more concrete than the nouns of verbs of formal or consultative register. We often slip into slang in casual register, and our audience doesn't need as much contextual information as does the audience for formal register. Casual register is also ideal for expressing our feelings. In fact, in the majority of human beings, our emotions are more on the surface of our psyche when we use casual register than when we use formal register. Now let us turn our attention to the question of the purpose of personal writing. Why our culture has personal writing. Journals and diaries have been around for centuries, millennia, but they became especially important in the English-speaking world in the late 18th century with the rise of the teachings of John Wesley and the rise of the Methodist Church. John Wesley asked his followers to document their conversion, to document how they came to know Christ and how this conversion changed their lives. Decades later, the Church of the Latter-day Saints gave birth to another resurgence in journal keeping among women pioneers, the women whose hard work and sacrifice allowed the Church of the Latter-day Saints to flourish in the American West. In more current times, both religious and secular organizations have made use of journal keeping. One field that has had great success with asking participants to keep a journal is the world of therapy. Therapists worldwide have asked their clients to take up pen and paper or computer and keyboard to work through emotional issues as an adjunct to talk therapy. The therapeutic use of personal writing even has its own label, expressive writing, and the use of expressive or personal writing has grown rapidly in the past 4 decades. In our culture, personal writing is specifically for spiritual and emotional growth. We must conclude, therefore, that the purpose for the sphere of personal writing in our culture is to facilitate spiritual and emotional growth. I want you to think about this because you will discuss it with your instructor during class. Ask yourself why a high school English teacher might ask students to do personal writing. Ask yourself how personal writing, with its emphasis on casual register, might prepare you for college-level writing, which demands a mastery of formal register. Ask yourself if your teachers are trained to guide you through spiritual and emotional growth. Jot down the thoughts and ideas that come to you as you ponder these questions. You will need these when you return to class. Let us turn our attention to this next sphere of writing, creative writing. And I propose we list several examples of creative writing, such as novels, plays, screenplays, short stories, poetry, creative nonfiction, also known as narrative nonfiction. Those are broad categories. So let's break down a couple of the items in this list to make sure we have a good understanding of the term creative writing. What are some of the genres of novels you may have read? For example, mysteries, historical fiction, fantasy, young adult fiction, paranormal fiction, romance, westerns, and literary fiction. There are many others, but this list will suffice. Now, what are some of the different forms of poetry you may have read? For example, you've probably read sonnets, epic poems, free verse poems, haiku, villanelles, sestinas. The list can go on and on and on because poetry comes in many, many more forms, but this list will suffice. We now have 3 short lists. Take a look at them. The broad categories, the breakdowns of different genres of novels, the breakdowns of different forms of poetry. We can see how the sphere of creative writing is far-ranging. And now we need to think carefully about audience. Is the audience for a paranormal young adult novel the same as the audience for a sonnet? Perhaps. But would someone choosing to read a young adult paranormal novel be satisfied with a sonnet? No, of course not, because each type of creative writing conforms to specific expectations. If I pick up a mystery, I want a sleuth, either amateur or professional, to become embroiled in the events, the facts, and the people surrounding someone's death. While I do appreciate sonnets, I prefer, as do most mystery lovers, that the clues and red herrings to the solution be interwoven with a quest for a deeper understanding of the people and events around which the death took place, which is really hard to do in 14 lines of iambic pentameter, which follow a careful rhyme scheme. The sonnet's history shows that it's best suited for expressions of love, admiration, and awe, but not for solving a murder mystery. So we can see that the audience for creative writing is far-ranging too, as we have kinds, types, or genres of creative writing. And to determine the audience for creative writing, we need to take all of the far-ranging examples and determine what constitutes the audience expectations for the whole of the sphere of creative writing. What relation does the creative writer have with her audience? Does the reader of any kind of creative writing know the writer personally? If you've read Hamlet or Othello, what is your relation to Shakespeare? If you've read 1984, what is your relation to George Orwell? If you've read The Bluest Eye, what is your relation to Toni Morrison? Think of every novel, short story, or poem you've ever read. What is your relation to the writers of these works? These are challenging questions, and we might not be able to answer the question of who is the audience for creative writing until we do a little reasoning about what purpose creative writing serves in our culture. I need to remind you one more time that we are not concerned with why a novelist writes novels or why a poet writes poetry. We are concerned about the role creative writing, novels, poetry, etc., plays in our culture. So now, take a few moments to think about the following claim. The reader of young adult paranormal fiction reads a vampire novel for the same reason an elderly English teacher reads a Shakespearean sonnet. Pause the video, and in your notebook, jot down as many reasons as possible that this claim is true. Ask yourself, what does each reader seek in what she chooses to read? When you can explain why this assertion is true, you understand the purpose that creative writing serves in our culture, and you will discuss this further in class. Finally, we come to academic writing, which is the focus of the class you are taking. You're entering college, and one might presume all of the writing you do for your classes will be academic writing. I say presume because not everyone who teaches writing classes or who gives writing assignments has thought through the distinctions among personal, creative, and academic writing. I say presume because our exploration of these distinctions is what will help you determine how best to meet the requirements an instructor or professor demands in a writing assignment. You might want to review the videos in this series that explain literacy and define academic writing. So, as we did with personal and creative, let's start with a list of examples of academic writing. First of all, any paper or essay you write for this class. Most college textbooks. And we write most here because some textbooks that purport to be academic contain vast swaths of creative writing, and there is a current push to honor personal subjective writing as academic. These textbooks confuse the issue of what an instructor means when she talks about writing, and that means that the issue of how to grade the writing assignment is confused too. To essays and college textbooks, let's add peer-reviewed journals. And with a short warning, I will add also editorials and some narrative nonfiction. Let's think about the items on this list. How would you characterize the audience for these items? I would suggest that they are A, interested in the subject of the paper, the article, or the book. B, want to learn more about it, want to learn something new about it or something different they don't know yet. They hold informed opinions while maintaining a receptive attitude toward learning more about the subject. And finally, D, they expect the text to conform to academic standards of English usage and conventions. In other words, this audience wants to care about what you've written. Even though they may already know a great deal about the subject, they are interested in your thinking on this subject. And that leads us to register. Which register is most appropriate for academic writing? Isn't it formal register? After all, a key expectation for these texts is that they conform to academic standards of English usage and conventions. And what's the primary reason someone reads a college textbook or an article in a peer-reviewed journal? Aren't the expectations of the readers of academic writing the same as the purpose of formal register? That is, to be informed and persuaded? We have thus rectified the term writing for your work in this course. Ideally, you have some questions and ideas that you can bring up in class. But before the video ends, let's examine why you need to know these distinctions. 1. As already stated, how an instructor or professor defines writing will dictate how she grades your paper. And that's something that's good to know before you start writing. 2. Each sphere of writing originates from a distinct part of our personality. Personal writing comes from our emotions. That's why therapists use it as an adjunct to therapy. That's why individuals seeking spiritual and emotional growth turn to expressive personal writing. Creative writing emerges from our imagination and is given shape by our understanding of the craft necessary to produce the poem or the novel or the memoir. And academic writing is the careful work of our intellect. We reason about evidence, then come to a valid claim which we can support with that evidence and persuade through our reasoning our inferences regarding how the evidence fits a larger view. You will need to know which faculty to engage when you sit down to write. Your imagination, as wonderful as it is, might not help you write a valid and convincing argument about how the development of the wheel transformed societies and economies. And as moved as you may be by the struggles of millet farmers in medieval Europe, those emotions won't help you craft an academic argument. Spheres of writing might be the most important tool you will learn this summer because it will help you focus your intellect on academic writing. It will sharpen your understanding of what constitutes true argumentation, and it will save you the frustration of using your emotions or your imagination to prove an academic argument. The average high school English teacher has not had the benefit of studying the distinctions between and among the three spheres of writing. The average college professor is not a writing instructor. These well-meaning educators often provide writing prompts that blur the distinctions among the spheres of writing. This rectification of terms, therefore, will allow you to discern what your professors want when they give you a writing assignment. And here's a hint, they usually expect you to write an academic essay. I will explain further how to apply all this information about spheres of writing in a separate video. Thank you for viewing this video in the Miss Anne Thrope Explains series.